Hi everyone, welcome to Chickadee Cottage Creations. My name is Amanda, and in today's video I have 5 spring thrift flips for you. I don't know if you've been as excited for spring as I have been, but I was very eager to get out the craft supplies and start upcycling a few items. So if you haven't yet, I would certainly appreciate it if you liked today's video and content, if you would consider subscribing to my channel, and if you did like the content, I would certainly appreciate you hitting the like button. For the very first project, I'm taking an item that I actually really love the way it is already. So there actually wasn't much that I wanted to change about it. I briefly considered painting it, but honestly, I really love the galvanized look. I loved everything about this item, the shape, everything. So I'm looking through the IOD transfers to see if I can find something just to add a little bit of spring zhuzh to it. I just want to zhuzh it up a little bit just to kind of add a spring element. And in this is from the spring IOD release. I don't remember the name of this book specifically, but on the back 2 pages they had this little section that I thought would be perfect because it fits perfectly in right there where you can see that I'm putting it. It even kind of follows the same shape, so I thought it was perfect. Now if you've ever used an IOD transfer, rub-on transfer, or any rub-on transfer at all, the IOD rub-on transfers are very high quality. I've used a lot of different rub-on transfers from different brands. You know, there's Essential Stencils that makes them, redesigned by Prima or with Prima. All sorts of different stencils. Amazon has a bunch of options. The IOD stencils are, in my opinion, the superior, or sorry, not stencils, rub-on transfers are, in my opinion, the superior rub-on transfers. They just, when they go on, they actually don't look like a transfer. They don't feel like a transfer if you rub your hands over them. They almost like meld into the project, almost like you're doing an iron-on transfer onto clothing. So that's one of the reasons why I love them so much and why I will always give IOD my money whenever they have a new release come out. So I'm applying one of these to each side, and as you can see there, I'm just taking that transfer stick and I start rubbing in one spot, kind of working my way out. If you start to lift it up, and as you see I do here, and it's starting to pull the transfer with it, just put it back down and keep rubbing a little bit more. Even if you were to pull the whole thing off and it took a little section with it, you can just lay it right back down, rub a little bit more, and it will come off onto the item. So I'm going through rubbing from one end to the other. As it releases, I'm lifting up the paper. It's really very easy to do. If you're going to start with any item that is IOD, the rub-on transfers are probably the best spot to start if you're new to crafting. Again, I love this item. This is probably an item I'm going to keep in my own decor. I love kind of that galvanized look, and as you can see, it's got rust around the edges. I love everything about it. Now with the transfers, even if it's IOD, it's always, not always, it's usually a good idea, in my opinion, to put a bit of a sealer over top of it. So when this is done, I do put some Big Top from DIY over the top just to kind of help protect it. But metal is great for transfers. They hold up really well on metal, in my experience anyway. And I've almost got it completely off, and once it's off, you'll see that I flip that, or that I take that paper that I used, that the grid paper there, and I rub it on there to burnish it, it's called. So it's basically making sure that it's adhered to the surface. And that's it for this one. I love the way it turned out. I love that little splash of color on it. I think it just goes so perfectly with that rusty, crusty look that it has on the edges. A little bit of that shabby chic a bit. So I think this turned out great, and this is definitely an item I'm keeping in my own decor. So on to project 2. This one, so this is an item I've had in my stash for a little while. It's actually really cheap, not well built. It's even bent in one section there. So I wasn't even sure I was ever going to use it for something. But then when we got the Trimmings 4 mold from IOD, so I wanted to use that to kind of fancy it up a little bit. So with the amazing casting resin that I'm using here, and I did briefly consider using clay. However, because it's going to be hanging off the edges of it, I thought the clay would be a little too fragile, which is why I went with a resin. So with the Amazing Cast and Resin, it only takes 10 minutes for it to start to set up. And what you do is you mix one part of part A and one part of part B, so equal parts. So if in this case I made 60 milliliters, so I had 30 milliliters of one, 30 milliliters of the other, and you just stir it until it starts to go clear and you start to feel the container warming up a little bit, and that's when you then pour it in. Because IOD tells you exactly how much you need, I mixed the exact right amount because they tell you exactly how much it takes to fill the mold. And I leave a time lapse in here, I think, because I wanted to show you. I never get tired of seeing it. With the Amazing Casting Resin, it starts to turn white really fast, actually. And yes, this is a time lapse, but even though it's a time lapse, it still happens pretty quickly in real time as well. And you'll see there, it's turning white. And when it turns white, that basically just means that it's starting to set up. And once it's set up enough, and you'll see I've already cast a few others there at the top, it easily pulls out. You just flip it over and pop it right out. If you were using air dry clay, you'd want to use some cornstarch to kind of help it release before you put the clay in there. But with a resin, you can just pour it straight in and it pulls right out. So what I'm doing here is I'm kind of measuring the section next to the riser because it's just a little bit longer, and because I had just pulled this out, it's still warm and very pliable, almost like taffy a little bit. So I can very easily cut through it. I had no issues cutting through this just to give it kind of an even edge. And once I have all four of those cast, and this is actually where I made a little bit of a mistake, I probably should have glued each one on right as it was coming off. Because this riser's so cheaply made, it had a lot of defects. It was warped in some areas, wasn't perfectly straight in others. If I had attached it when it was still warm and pliable, I could have molded it to the exact edge, so I would have been able to have it fit on there perfectly with no seams around the top. Because I didn't, there were a few seams. It's not the end of the world or anything, but just if you happen to do anything like this, I'd maybe consider still attaching them while they're warm. As you can see on the edges there, they don't match up perfectly. I wasn't too worried about getting them to match up perfectly. So what I'm doing is I'm taking some air dry clay and I'm just filling it into those edges so that it doesn't have such a harsh line. And it actually worked out really well. Now here I'm taking, it's called London All-in-One Paint, I think it is. London is the color, I believe. I wouldn't necessarily use this again on something like this. It's a great paint, and this is the first time I've used it. It's a great paint, but I think it's meant possibly more for furniture or cabinetry. It had a very different... I just probably wouldn't use it again for a craft project like this, especially since I plan on using some rub-on transfers, and I did have some issues with the paint pulling up with the rub-on transfers. So in the future, I probably would keep this to my furniture projects. So I apply a thin layer over, or not a thin layer, I apply a layer over the top and also on the sides, and I think I did 2 coats. And here actually you can see a few of those gaps on the edges that I was talking about. They're not bad, but just, yeah, next time I would have done it when it was still a touch warm. So I'm just coming into another of the spring transfers from IOD. I cut out a bunch of options that I thought could work. I'm not going to use all of these. I just wanted to kind of play around and see what might look nice. And I just keep moving it around until I decide what I like. And once I do get a layout that I do like, I just grab one and go for it. And that one right there. I pull off the top or the backer paper and I just start rubbing it on. And there were a few sections, like I mentioned, where the paint pulled up. It wasn't bad, and I was able to easily fix it so that you could never see that there was ever paint pulled up. But just like we did on the galvanized metal project, it's just a matter of rubbing and pulling up. For the most part, they did come up really well, and you'll see here I've got all those transfers down. I did also add some white words from another IOD transfer. Not remembering the name of that one right now either, but, and here you can see I'm doing some of the touch-ups on those few little spots where the white popped up, or where the paint pulled up. Again, you can't tell it all once it's done, and then I'm just touching up some of the white there. But this is how the final project turned out, and I think it took what was just a really cheaply made, not overly impactful item and made it into something really unique that's possibly a conversation starter. So I really like the way this one turned out. On to project 3. This one is another creative, the CNC DIY Factory. It's a wonderful couple. They're located in Kansas City, and they make a lot of wood items, a lot of wood kits, wood frames, just a lot of really neat wood items. She does a regular weekly live on Facebook if you ever get the chance to catch it. It's Thursday nights at 6:30 Central, I believe it is. But she made these frames, and she gifted us some of the other creators in this playlist frames so that we could try using them, and they're really great quality frames. So they've done a really nice job with their frames. And the back is separate, but the back is also wood, so it's really great. You can put whatever you want on it. You could even do heavier items. It's perfect for this sort of project. They have bulk packages of the frames, a lot of kits. Again, if you get a chance, I would go check out their website. I've got the link in the comments. So I painted the back of the board white because I plan on doing some decoupage, and here I'm using from the Upcycled spring release. This one is called Topography Love, and I was trying to find a section that I wanted. I really wanted the music notes, but they weren't quite the right height. I could have maybe done this section right there that I have over it, but it just didn't quite line up. So the one that lined up the best, and you see I really wanted those music notes, but they weren't the right size. I ended up going with this section right there because that seemed to line up the best for the size of the board. And I'm just going to cut it out. I use my finger to kind of create a dent or a ridge in the paper so that I know where to cut. And the reason I painted the white behind it, that paper, as you can see, is pretty see-through, especially once you get the decoupage medium on it. It'll pick up whatever the background is, and I don't want any of the background to show through. I want the paper itself to be the focus, so that's why I painted it white. And I just apply a thin strip. I'm using the DIY liquid patina, and I just applied a thin strip at the top, and then I'm going to attach the paper at the top. And then once I do that, I apply a little bit more, and I keep going down the entire thing until I have the whole sheet attached, just smoothing it out with my fingers. If it were a bigger sheet, I would have potentially sprayed it with a mister just to kind of release those fibers to make it easier to fit, but being that it was a 8x10 section, I didn't feel the need to do that. I had no issues getting all the wrinkles out. And then once I do have all of it done, I'm applying a thin layer of the liquid patina over the top just to kind of seal it in, making sure I got any and all wrinkles out. And then now I'm going to paint the frame. So I'm going to use the DIY Apothecary, which is a really great spring green. And I think I do 2 coats on this frame. It's a raw wood frame. I had initially thought about staining it, but I really wanted to use this green. I use this green in quite a bit of my decor or similar greens. So once I've got both coats on there, I end up also doing some big top over it just because it is a clay-based paint. It can be reactivated with water, so I wanted to make sure that it was sealed. I wasn't wanting to distress this one at all. You'll see here, that's how it looks over that. I think it looks really great. Apparently I lost this footage, but I had, just like I did with the previous project where I made the molds, I had also used another of the IOD spring molds to make these molds. So they were the bird's nest molds, and then also there was another mold with some different florals, like cherry blossom style florals. So the first color that I'm using is the Fusion Woodwick, I believe it is. The Fusion paint is perfect for this because it has a built-in primer and sealer, so I actually don't have to seal this, and it adheres really well to resin. I mean, the DIY paint would work too, but this just makes it really easy in the long run. I'm kind of not being as careful here with my painting. I'm painting everything that might be brown, the branches, the nest, and I'm not super careful because this is just the first layer. We're going to be putting other colors over top of it, so it doesn't matter as much for the first layer. And then I'm taking Dixie Belle Secret Path. I wanted kind of a lighter spring color for the flowers. I'm going to note here though, I do actually change this color a bit later. I liked it at first, but then the more I looked at it, the less I ended up liking it. I think maybe it was just that I had too many colors going on and it was kind of clashing a little bit. I'm not sure, but you'll see purple for most of it, and then at the end I do switch it to another color. But here I'm a little more careful with my painting, using a little bit smaller brush, just making sure that I get all of the areas that are the flowers without covering up the brown that I already painted on there. You notice there are still some white areas. Those are actually leaves, so we're going to be coming in with another color after that. So now I'm pulling out the blue pine. This is again a fusion paint, and I'm going to be painting the eggs in the nest. Eggs, in my experience, tend to often have a blue tint or yellow tint, orange tint, but I was kind of imagining these to be robins. They're, in my area anyway, they are the classic spring birds. As soon as you start seeing robins, you know spring's on the way, and desperate as I have been for spring, I was just kind of imagining these to be robins. So now I pulled out a green. I think this one might have been Carriage House by Fusion, and I'm just painting all the leaves. And again, being a little more careful with that. And I'm just placing everything on here now just to kind of see how it looks. So this is an antiquing glaze. I had what I thought was a brilliant idea to apply some antiquing glaze to these birds. You know how birds often have a bit of a mottled look to their feathers? It's never just a straight white or a straight, well, it seems pretty rare that it's just a straight white. I kind of wanted to see if I could pull out some of that mottled look by using an antiquing glaze. It did not work quite the way I had hoped it would, at least not on that bird I was just painting. When I wiped it back, it just kind of looked messy, which was not at all the look I was going for. I did like how it looked on this bird, so I do keep it on the breast of that second bird. But you'll see the rest of the other two birds I end up painting a fusion color, and I think that one was Seaside. I didn't actually get a glance of it there. Initially I thought I might just paint the tips of the wings blue and leave the center kind of the antique glaze brown. I changed my mind with that too. You'll see by the end I've painted the entire bird blue. And then that other one, I painted most of it blue, but left the breast, the antique glaze. So now I'm going in with some of the Dixie Belle Best Dang wax, and I wanted to kind of lighten everything up a bit. It seemed just a bit dark and a little not very dimensional, so I wanted to add in some wax to see if I could kind of help that out a bit. And with the wax, I just apply a layer over it. I let it sit for about 10 minutes, and then I came back in with a cloth and wiped it off. Here I'm coming back in, so it's sat for a little while, and I go in and I wipe everywhere that I don't want as much wax, and it settles into all the little grooves there. And I think it actually looks pretty good at this point. I was still okay with the lavender at this point. I hadn't quite decided that I needed to change it, so I'm just placing everything out on the frame how I might want it to be. And I'm going to use the Titebond Quick and Thick glue there to attach everything to the backer and the frame. I prefer to use kind of a stick to spread it on. I know some people will use their fingers. I have a texture issue. I can't have that glue on my fingers for too long. It just drives me a little bonkers, so I like to use the stick to spread it out evenly. And once I've got it all done, and actually I think I do put some weighted items on these flowers just to make sure that they stay flat, and I'm wiping off any of the excess. And here you can see I changed it to white. I changed those flowers to white. I like it so much better with the white. I don't know what it was about the lavender or the lilac. And I love that color. It's a great spring color, the lilac color, but It just wasn't doing for me with this project. I think it was just contrasting too much with the blue. So the eggs themselves aren't standing out much at this point, so I wanted to go in. I should have possibly splattered them before attaching it to the frame. I could have taped around them and done some paint splatter, which would have looked really nice. But because I did not do that, I'm going to come in with a fan brush. I'm going to put a little bit of DIY paint on it and then water it down. And then I'm just going to kind of touch and dab around on the eggs to just kind of give them a little extra texture, a little something to kind of make them stand out from the rest. And that's how that turned out, and here's the finished project. Despite changing my mind a couple times on this project, I think it turned out great. These frames are absolutely wonderful. I would highly recommend heading over to Cindy and Chris's website. It's going to be in the links. cncdiyfactory.com, I believe, is the link. They have a lot of great items, a lot of great kits, wood kits. Just go ahead and go take a look at their website. Project 4. So this one here might be my favorite. I'm not sure. It's pretty simple, but I love the way it turned out. So I got this at Goodwill. Goodwill prices are crazy. My Goodwill doesn't price anything under $3.99 anymore, even if it doesn't matter what size it is. Everything's at least $3.99. So this was $6.99. At first I wasn't going to get it, but I ended up deciding I could turn it into something that I might actually use. So the green itself is not a bad green. I don't hate the green, but my decor tends to be more whites and neutrals. I have a lot of whites and neutrals in my decor. So I wanted to take some DIY white swan and just give everything a good solid coat of the white swan. I think I end up doing 2 coats on this. Here you can see I'm finishing up the first coat. There's quite a bit to paint, and I did even paint the bottom because I'm a little bit obsessive like that. And here it is after 2 coats. It's looking great. Looks like a white picket fence, the classic American Dream white picket fence. But I want it to be a little bit more distressed. It's a little too perfect. So I come in with a wet wipe, and of course, because it's DIY paint, you can easily wet distress it. You just do some light rubbing with a wet I can't say it, a wipe, basically, and it's going to pull some of that green out. And I really like the way that looks. It looks distressed, but not too grungy. But because it is DIY paint, as easily as we were able to wet distress it, we do need to seal it, especially with what I was using it for, or what I do end up using it for. There is a chance where it could get water on it in the future, so I seal it with the Big Top. So these I got at Hobby Lobby during their 40% off Woodcraft sale. So I think I paid, I don't know, maybe $3.50 for it. And I used my Cricut to actually make a Hello Spring sign for this. If you don't have a Cricut, you could easily stencil words on. You could also stamp words on. You could hand paint words on. There's all sorts of different ways that you can do that. I just really wanted to use the Cricut because I love the clean, sharp lines it gives me, and I am terrible at hand painting letters. So I just used some transfer tape to transfer this to the sign, and I'm pulling off the transfer tape. The exclamation point wanted to stick, but everything else came off really easy. So now that I've got that down there, I'm just going to be weeding out and pulling off the edging of it. Some people do this before they transfer the letters over. I just find it easier for me to do this after I've transferred the letters over. So I'm using my little Cricut tool there to weed out the insides of some of those letters, and I'm just pulling it back, removing all the excess. I chose a font that was appealing to me. It was a little more whimsical, not very serious, and this is how it turned out. And then I bring back the white picket fence basket, I guess you could call it, over here, and this fit perfectly on it. I didn't even have to adjust the strings or anything on the sign. So I just filled it with some mason jars, put some baby's breath with some water in those mason jars, and then filled it in with a little bit of kind of like a fake moss. It just gives it a really nice whimsical look. This is something I could use all year round, so I can have more of those signs. I could actually make signs for different seasons and fill that with different items. But on to project 5. So this is the final project. This is an item I picked up at a thrift store. I think I might have paid 99 cents for it. I'm going to be using the Fusion Cashmere. Oh, you can see me in there a little bit. So the reason I'm using Fusion on this one instead of DIY, anytime I paint on metal, I tend to prefer the Fusion paint over the DIY. Not that DIY can't paint on metal, I just find that having that built-in, primer and sealer kind of makes it just a little more effective on metal given the slick surface. So I end up doing 2 or 3 coats on this, and I do leave the top metal still because I like that effect. And then I go to the IOD transfer book. This is another one from their spring release, and I know I for sure want to use birds. So I find the bird that I want to use and I cut it out. And then I find some corresponding florals. I end up going with almost like a purpley pink tone to most of them, and those are the ones that I ended up selecting. It's really just what colors appeal to you. I'm going to save those birds for another project. IOD does an amazing job with their birds. So now that I've got the ones that I plan on using chosen, I move everything off to the side. And just like we did with the other transfers, it's the same thing. You just remove the backing, apply it. This is a rounded edge though, so you do have to be just a little bit more careful when you're rubbing it on. Sometimes, I don't know if you've ever tried to put paper on a rounded surface, it'll fold in areas. So you might have little tiny sections that overlap, but you actually really can't tell. It turned out really great. I actually really like the way this came out on the urn or vase or jug. I'm not sure what you'd call this. But I just keep rubbing and it released really easily. It adhered really well to this paint. And then again, once it's all done, I take that backer paper and I burnish it into the project. And I'm loving the way that turned out. It really just pops. And then I flip it over to the other side and I apply the other 2 sets of flowers that I have picked off of there. As you can see, I kind of went with that purple. And then I was kind of torn. I wasn't sure whether to use this or not. And I finally just decided, I'm going to go for it. One of the reasons I wasn't sure is the section I decided to apply that to was challenging. Not super challenging, but it was a little bit challenging. I apologize that I'm off camera here. I was not paying attention at all. But if you notice, the rim there has not only a bend in one direction, but then it also has a curve in the other direction. So you're kind of fighting with curves all over in this. So it kept popping out in different areas. I did end up with one stem that has a little gap between the other section of stem. But for the most part, it actually turned out really pretty good. You can't tell that there were really any sections that didn't quite adhere as they should have. So I was overall really happy with how that turned out. I just kept adjusting it to try to make sure that it matched up with the previous sections. And then I was very careful when burnishing on this one because there were a few sections that weren't fully flat, so I had to make sure when I burnished them that I got them flat onto the surface. And then because the paint itself does not need to be sealed, but the transfer itself really should, so I took the big top again and I applied a layer of the big top over the entire project. Not the inside, just the outside of the project. And that's it. I love the way this turned out. This is definitely going to be something that could last most of the year. I mean, I could see this being used for quite a while. It's just a really pretty vase. That white really pops out the colors, and I love the way it turned out. Trying to get angles of all of it. Thank you so much for watching today's video. If you haven't yet, I certainly would appreciate if you would hit that subscribe button to get notified anytime I release new videos. And I hope you have an amazing time with your spring projects.